has everybody got acquainted so far?
Almost, I think.
Okay, let's just go start from the top left. Colin, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay. Hey, I'm Colin. I live in Coronado, and I'm on Cambridge Avenue near the Circle Park. During the year, I teach at a school called Phoenix Country Day School. We're going to find out on Thursday whether we actually go back into the classroom or teach on Zoom. So that's a very, my year is going to look very different depending on what decisions are made on Thursday. So that's my basic introduction.
I'm Kelvin West. I am Taylor West's husband, and we have a wonderful show called Call in America. Make sure you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we also live in Coronado, and we're an interracial couple. So race is definitely something that we have to, navigate as well. And so we're just leading this conversation because, I have a lot of ideas what Black people should do, and Taylor was really inspired by what white people should do. So here we are.
Who's turning it now?
Quinn.
Hi, I'm Quinn Wickham. I also lived in Coronado. I've moved here about a year and a half ago, actually to Phoenix from Oklahoma. I work at ASU in administration there, and proposal manager. I've been working from home pretty much since this whole thing started, on Zoom a lot. I pretty much classify myself as white, and I listened to the book about 3 weeks ago and was really moved by it. So I'm eager to learn more.
And then we're with Julia.
Hey, I'm Julia Fournier. I've lived in the neighborhood for 35 years. I taught school for 30 years. And I operate the Hive, own the Hive, and run a couple businesses here at the Hive. And yeah, I don't want to, it's not supposed to be about us, right? So that's enough.
Well, this whole discussion is actually all about white people. So lean right in. This is about you today. Absolutely.
No, I mean, I really appreciated the book. I didn't love everything about the book.
Good.
But I needed to hear every single word of it. And I have adopted children who are dark-skinned Hispanic. And so I thought I was above being ever considering myself a racist. And for lots of other reasons that she outlines that white people say all the time, I'm not a racist because of X, or I'm not a racist because of Y. And during the last, I want to say, 5 years, I've been kind of unpacking that whole idea of everybody is a race, all white people are racists because we take advantage of the system. And she said a lot of things that really spoke to me personally. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have read it and to engage in this discussion.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. Let's go with you, Jennifer.
Hello, I'm Jennifer. I've lived in the neighborhood for about 10 years now. I do many different things. I am a body worker, do massage therapy. I am a sound healer, and I do Reiki, and I do guided meditations. And then I'm also mainly right now, I'm a care provider for my sister. I am just getting started with the book, so, I will participate when it's appropriate. But I grew up in a multiracial family. So like what Julia said, you do feel like somehow that gives you a pass to be above it. And that's a hard thing to realize, that you've done that and taken advantage of things that you weren't even aware you were doing. So I've started another book of how to be an anti-racist. And so I had started that previously, but then I saw this talk come up, and I was really interested in participating. So I'm gonna just be here and see what happens.
Well, we're glad to
Thank
have
you.
you. Thank you. Thank you for that. It's awesome. Taylor.
Hi, my name is Taylor West. I live in Coronado as well. So I am a 32-year-old white male that was born and raised in Phoenix. I do come from I would say a diverse family, as it resolves to having Democrats, Republicans, gay individuals, straight individuals, kind of a diverse subset, but the consistency is that we're all white. And so this book has allowed me to understand the different perspectives of when it kind of starts to integrate politics, when it starts to integrate men versus women, about how we interact in the white perspective and the white purview, and the learning lessons of how to have conversations with other white individuals, including my family. So I'm excited about the conversation. I think this is the beginning of a very long journey for me, myself, being married to a Black gay man. It is definitely a lifelong commitment that has started to open my eyes of what this adventure looks like. And this is kind of my first beginning step. So I'm excited to have the conversations with everyone here. And thank you for allowing me to participate in the conversations with you all.
Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. And I love you. All right, let's go ahead and go to Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire. I missed the first part, so I'm not sure exactly what we're supposed to say, but I'll just model it off of what I've been hearing. So I've been in the neighborhood since 2011 and moved into our second house in the neighborhood a couple years ago. It's about a block and a half from our first house, so just really liked the area. And so I guess I just had finished the book, and when I saw this come up in Facebook or something, so it felt like a really good time to kind of dig into the ideas a bit. My impressions of the book, initially, my very first impression was just sort of like I felt really relieved to have like a space to just kind of talk about it, because I think there's a lot of things that I sort of suspected about myself throughout the years, just in the ways that I interacted with people of color, and being a white liberal, it was very hard to sort of recognize that was really just racism and sort of not engaging as much as I should have been. So that's, for me, I feel like just this is the beginning of my journey to start doing a lot of work on myself to kind of grow into this. So I'm just super excited to have this discussion. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that share. That's awesome that you're getting a safe space from White Fragility. I mean, that's so important to be able to understand it and to act upon it. So, okay, where'd you switch? Okay, let's go to Ms. Vink. Hi, Dr. Alicia Vink.
Hi. Thank you for hosting this. So I live in the neighborhood and am an educator and am raising a 7-year-old son who is blonde hair, blue-eyed, and going to be very tall, and working to raise him to acknowledge his privilege and be anti-racist.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, screen switched on me here. Let's go to Nancy. You haven't spoke yet, right?
No, I haven't. I actually just came on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you. You're gorgeous, darling. I love those frames.
Awesome. Thank you. I was having some technical difficulties. This is my very first time on Zoom.
Wow. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little about yourself. We're just kind of getting acquainted right now.
Okay, so I live in the neighborhood. I'm kind of new. I've lived in this neighborhood for a year. Lived out in the West Valley for 29 years. And I've been doing this work for a while. I have dated outside of my race since middle school. I have a mixed race daughter, and so it's complex. This white fragility and this white supremacy, it's complex. And I really appreciate you guys putting up this place to have this conversation. So we can, I'm learning how to have conversations with people, and that's pretty much why I'm here. Not that I don't have more to learn, because I do have a lot to learn still. But I just appreciate that, just to have the the conversation.
Thank you so
Any
much.
questions?
Thank you so much for acknowledging it, and then having a dialogue about it is the absolute first steps in changing anything. So welcome. Thank you.
Yes, yes,
All
thank
right.
you.
We have Miss Sarah Sullivan. Go ahead. The floor is yours. There she is.
I am outside with my kids at the pool, so that's why I'm on mute and did not have my video on. So I have been learning about white privilege since I was in high school. I'm 38, 81 Club, Kelvin.
Hey yo, 81 Club for life, baby. I see you.
And you know, it's a new concept that I've been exploring thanks to Insight, Mary Stevens and Kate. You know, I've been learning about othering my whiteness. So that's a new thing for me to explore. And I have not read White Fragility. I've listened to Robin DiAngelo speak on videos about her book. So I'll be listening and learning tonight. Thank you.
Welcome. All right, we got to keep them coming. I love it. Okay, who was next? I believe Jennifer. Jennifer, have you spoke yet?
Yes, I have.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, the screen's changing.
That's okay, no worries.
Okay, Shannon. Hi, Shannon. You made it on. She might be listening because she just texted me that she's still working. So, Shannon, we're just going to go ahead and skip right past you. All right, if you want to come on and introduce yourself, by all means, do that. Shannon's a wonderful person. She lives out in Vegas. She's awesome. Okay, Tay, the floor is yours.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Well, welcome to Talk Tuesday. Thank you for the introductions. We will be discussing White Fragility today. The book, whether you have read it or not, there will be some questions that will be applicable to everybody, but then there will be specifics around the book. We do want this to be an open dialogue, but before we get started, we have a couple of quick house rules that we're just going to run through. So first of all, discussion is open for all listings. So all discussion is reserved for members who have read the book. Topics in question will be asked at members at random in groups of 3 or 5. So each question, we want to make sure that we try to get through. So try to keep responses to roughly 2 minutes or so. And then in addition to that, refrain from piggybacking and also interrupting. We want to make sure that whoever is speaking has the floor, can speak so that they get all of their thoughts out. If you have any background noise going on, please remember to mute yourself. And then when you come off to talk, please unmute yourself to speak your thoughts. We do want to refrain, as I said, for interruptions. And again, we want to start a conversation, a dialogue, but not necessarily debate, right? We want to make sure that this is a respectful environment of one another, whether you agree with those thoughts or opinions. They are thoughts and opinions of the speaker, and we must respect that at all times to create a safe environment. So when you've been called on, please take it upon yourself to say your name, take yourself off mute, and then again, speak your truth. So we are recording this. We will be sending it out to everyone. If you want to, I'm having a little bit troubles with the submission, but if you put your email address into the chat, we will send it out to everyone after the fact. But we hope that this becomes one of our reoccurring talks and discussions that we continue to have about White Fragility, the book, and future books. So any questions on the house rules before we get started?
No.
All right. So, you know, the book really starts off at the very preliminary foundation of what is racism and how does discrimination, how do prejudices fit into racism, and how does this all fit into white fragility? So starting off with a very direct question from the book of, to you, what is racism? What is discrimination, prejudice? What is this? What are the differences between the definitions of racism, discrimination, and prejudice? And then how does white fragility fit into these concepts? And what is white fragility to you?
Let's go ahead and start with whoever wants to kind of, start this out. These first ones are just kind of for everybody to warm the room, if you will, and get an idea of what we're talking about.
Well, I mean, one of the things that the book makes very clear is that discrimination and prejudice can be perpetrated by people of all colors and races, but racism and white fragility are particular to whites. If I got it right.
Right.
And
And I think
so,
there's,
I mean, that's
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Julia. Finish your thought.
Are you asking me to go ahead?
Yeah, finish your thought.
Yeah.
No, that was basically it. I mean, she makes a point of making it very clear that racism belongs to whites, and that white fragility is a sort of a byproduct of racism. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. And but people of all races can be prejudiced or can discriminate.
Absolutely. I think you hit that right on that nail right on the head. Did you feel like was that new to you after reading the book? Did you think that before you read the book?
No, I always knew that experts on race matters said racism can only be perpetrated or only exists or is something that whites perpetrate. And but I didn't know exactly why. I didn't, and when people would say, oh, that's, whatever, stupid reverse racism or whatever, I didn't know why that was incorrect exactly. And, white fragility, I don't know if that's a term she invented. And it's kind of a weird phrase, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of, it hits you like, what does that mean? But, by the end of the book, you understand what she is talking about in context with racism, institutional or systematic racism.
I just have a quick question for other people in the room here. Did white fragility come at you kind of like as was it a triggering thing for you? Like, did you feel like, white fragility?
Sorry, there was somebody else.
It's okay.
Okay. I wouldn't call it triggering for me. I would say that I saw myself in it. I couldn't leave the book without saying, yes, I participate in and perpetuate racism, right? And I kind of knew I would think that by the time I finished the book, but yeah, I mean, I certainly not something I like to think about myself. So that was definitely something that I saw there.
So hello, hi. To me, white fragility at first made me think of like a really old 90-year-old white woman who's very fragile.
And that's where it started off. And then as you went through the book, did your perception or definition of white fragility change?
Of course, hugely. Yeah, a lot. Yeah, it was a really good read, actually. But I'm wondering, like, how many people would actually read this book, like, across our social sectors,
That's actually a question that we're actually going to tackle a little bit later in the presentation.
Yep.
Good.
So
let's get to one of our.
Oh, go ahead, Quinn.
Oh, I was just going to say, I came to the book decidedly not a racist. I always thought it was something that racism was something that you did onto others. And and I considered myself, pretty woke, as it were. So it was quite an eye opener, and I really, by the end of the book, I really completely got it, and I understand that, and I think a lot now. I've been thinking a lot about sort of how my actions, the way I live, and interact with people? How much does that sort of keep the whole sort of the racism going? You know, so I'm trying to work through that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make sure we're all on the same page as everyone. I think one thing that was very, not necessarily eye-opening, just very definitive is that racism isn't an act, right? It's not an event, it's a structure. It's a system that is built from the beginning of the United States, right? And it's kind of a scary thought. But then prejudice and discrimination are concepts that people naturally just adhere to as they grow up throughout their lives, right? But discrimination and prejudices have negative connotations to it. People get defensive when they hear that they're prejudice or discrimination. And has anyone throughout the book started to identify prejudice or prejudgments that they have about people or other races, but being acceptable that, okay, this is just part of me growing up. I need to work on this. It's not bad. It's just I need to identify it and be better at it, right?
Right, but
I think it's part of it. Go ahead,
sorry,
Julia.
go ahead. No, I
No, you're
mean,
good. Go for it.
there are a lot of things that she repeats over and over again, right? Like when you're listening to it, you know, on audio recording, you think, oh, did I get back did I skip back? You know, but she does repeat things quite frequently. And one of them is, you know, we think of racism, we equate racism with the Ku Klux Klan or with the people who are pouring food over the heads of people at the lunch counters, you know, during the civil rights movement. So, you know, I'm definitely, I can't identify with those people, so I can't be a racist, right? So she laid the groundwork very well so that you can divorce yourself from that kind of racist, but still accept the fact that you are a racist just for being white. And I'm completely willing to accept that now.
Absolutely.
Hi, this is Shannon.
Hey, Shannon.
Hello. So I'm going to take a little break from work because I did read this book and I wanted to at least join in. I'm part of the conversation if that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Welcome.
Thank you. So when I read this particular book, and it was a long time ago that I actually read it, and I did a quick audiobook refresh of it. So I kind of came at this book at like a different angle, I guess. I was raised in a very racist, prejudiced community. Until I was in college, was not exposed to anybody outside the white race.
Wow.
So for me, I approached diversity and people different than me with curiosity, but not in that negative curiosity, but I've missed out on so much culture in my life and I've got to absorb it all. So I started reading books and doing a lot of investigation and made a lot of friends and started asking a lot of questions very late, but yet early on. The one thing that this book, I think, opened my eyes up to were the specific racist thoughts that I was raised around. It defined what that was to me. It pointed out where the discriminations were. It was the first time I'd ever heard white fragility ever utilized was within this book, so I wasn't familiar with that term until I had read it. And I certainly believe that exists. I mean, that certainly exists within myself, within my family, within even like my community group that I grew up with, people I work with. So it did kind of resonate with me, I think, a little bit differently than somebody if this is one of the first books that they picked up and started doing some research on. And for me, I think some of those, the things I probably, as a woman, when I walk down the street and the whole idea of like clutching my purse, that is more for men, and that has nothing to do with any specific race. It is men that I tend to have more negative feelings towards. I don't care if they're black or white, if they're Latino. It doesn't matter. If I am alone and there's a man, I immediately see a villain, and I think that is something just as little girls raised in a rural community that are then exposed into like the world that's like you are to be scared of men. So I don't know. So this book was for me it was a different approach.
That's powerful. Thank you.
No, I like that. And it gives it, that speaks to why you how you approach the book and why you decided to read it, which is, our first question of why did you decide to read the book, right? There's plenty of books out there. There's plenty of happening in the world. What made you want to dive in and read about white fragility for yourself in your own life?
I feel like, so I think I started reading it a little while ago and then stopped, and then it was the sort of as we came into this period of intense protest and resistance, communities sort of in uprising against the police and all of this, and I sort of felt like I wanted to be involved, but I was aware that there's a tendency of white people to sort of put it on Black people and people of color to sort of explain to them what the problem is. And so for me, I sort of felt like I'd heard this advice, do the work yourself. And so it seemed like, well, this is this white lady explaining to us white folk, just like these basics. So it feels like, for me, like the perfect starting point to just say you're gonna hear a lot of stuff that's gonna be hard, and you can just deal with that. And these are some ways for you to understand, why it's like this. So then when you move on to how to be an anti-racist or any number of other books, that they're sort of, it felt like groundwork for me. So that's why I had decided to read it.
That's awesome. I really love that.
So when when Trayvon Martin was killed, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear.
Barack Obama encouraged people to have discussions about race. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And so I organized a discussion about race in the community, and it was a disaster. I mean, it wasn't in this community. It was at Phoenix Center for the Arts with the director there and with Calvin Terrell. I don't know if you know him, and Cole, can't remember her last name, was there. So it was just a disaster. There were so many people showed up, and a lot of the things played out that are in this book. But I just really wanted to see how a successful discussion about racism could happen. But one of the reasons I decided to read this and take part in the discussion.
Ooh.
I definitely think it's a great book to introduce people to if they are wanting to learn more, because it puts your own life in perspective, and I think it can open your eyes to prejudice and racism that you didn't know existed with you. I guess it could either go one way or the other. You could be really upset by the book and be offended by it and never read another book again. Or if you're someone that's really willing to have your eyes open and your heart open, then it's a really good stepping stone into other resources that are out there. But I really find this book kind of soft in a way. It's very like on the surface when there's, it's a very specific topic.
Yeah, to me, this is one that I would share with my parents as a starting point, to get them to just kind of get out of their white fragility and just look at other races, just maybe consider a different perspective, So I agree with what you're saying, Shannon, of like, it's the grand scheme of things, it's a very soft toe in the water, right? Compared to some very direct, tough conversations that could take place about race in general. All right, so, question number 2, did you have any preconceived notions, judgments, or ideas prior to reading the book? And then as you're reading it, did you feel discomfort or defensiveness throughout the book? She kind of mentions that several times. And I think even at one point, she says, look, this is hard to comprehend, pause, take a breath, right? I think she set up the book in a way that made sure to try to make people uncomfortable, but then also acknowledge the fact that it's okay being uncomfortable, right? And so did you guys experience that as you were listening or reading the book of just defensiveness or discomfort around the topic that she was presenting?
So I don't really, I mean, I've wrestled with these ideas enough, I think, that not very much that she wrote made me defensive until she got to one part of the book. And it was the assertion that white people have racial prejudice or view their own race as superior by the time they're preschoolers. And my kind of knee-jerk reaction to that was, well, preschoolers are the center of the world. Of course you think your race is better than everybody else when you're a preschooler. Everything about you is better than everybody else when you're a preschooler. And I thought in that moment, it would have been really interesting to put some data in there about what do Black kids in preschool think of themselves. Do they think they're better than anybody else, or is there actually something else going on there? So yeah, that piece of evidence by itself was about the only thing in the book that didn't seem conclusive to me. And that's probably the only point where I was kind of defensive.
Yeah, I think that the first time I read through it, I was defensive because I was approaching it again from the, like, how can I be racist? I've never even had exposure to this. I'm just trying to learn and ask questions. So I didn't see, I hate the term, but, I remember, like, even in high school, my parents talking about being colorblind, right? And don't see race, you see people for people. And, I think that is not uncommon, especially probably in the 70s and 80s, right? Like, I don't think that's an uncommon thing to hear in households back then. So I wasn't really, like, offended, but I was kind of like, well, dang, I haven't even had the chance to even learn anything about this. How can I already be racist, right? So I think there was a little bit of that context initially for me.
Gotcha, that makes total sense. I like that.
I mentioned earlier that when I started reading it, it was kind of the same thing. I didn't consider myself racist, but I also grew up with this idea that you shouldn't see, you see everyone the same, neutral, whatever. There's no color differences or whatever. But I think the challenge for me through much of my life was that I did see that there are differences. And so how do I sort of reconcile that? And I never really came to an answer, how you sort of reconcile sort of different races or whatever. So to me, it was really that's part of what made this book so eye-opening, was to recognize that it's much more systemic than just an issue with sort of my own understanding. As far as discomfort, I don't think I really felt discomfort. If anything, it was more of just kind of a weight being lifted off of me, that beginning to really grasp a new way of looking at these issues. And yeah, I didn't really find any defensiveness either.
That's exactly, yeah, and I think that's where you can find discomfort or defensiveness, but on the opposite, the more you know about, the more educated you are about the topic, the more confident you feel about it, right? The more you start to get to know yourself a little bit more in some cases, which has the exact opposite definition of discomfort and defensiveness that she was articulating throughout the book, so that's excellent. And, as one thing that we noticed throughout in doing some research is that there's definitely different phases when it comes to acknowledging racism, fighting racism, acknowledging white fragility. And I think she even at one point throughout the book says, if you can just accept the fact that as a white person, you have privileges beyond or over other races, that is a large milestone, right? And if there's milestone, that starts to insinuate that this is an event, a process, not necessarily an adventure, but a commitment that a white person will go through, right? And it has step-by-step courses through it. So going through this, I'm just curious, what phase are you in this process of fighting racism and discovering white fragility going into the book, and where have you come from and where are you going as a white person throughout those phases?
So, hey, this is Joe. I don't think you can see my face because I'm actually driving. So I want to make sure that you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you, Joe.
Good. I didn't want to interrupt or anything, but I wanted to weigh in here for the past couple of minutes. But unfortunately, I am driving. You saw me a little bit earlier because I'm walking to my car. A couple things I want to say is, so the gal who spoke just a second ago talking about growing up in a rural town where there was little to no black people, it was all white people, whatever, right? And so she was just based on, a community and thought of fear. And so whether it's no matter what color they are, what race they are, if it was a male person, she would automatically, feel a little bit of fear, right? So I found that very important to be connected with white fragility because that happens so extremely often. I'm kind of amazed. So I also grew up in a very rural town. There was literally one black family who, by coincidence, was the first person I ever kissed on Spin the Bottle. So I was taught to not fear, not fear, to fear, but always be looking around. And I was taught defense mechanisms in case I ever was, in a situation where I had to defend myself. So to this day, rarely am I ever in a place where I'm actually in fear because I have the tactics to know what to do in certain situations. Not many of them. Like, you literally have 3 seconds to do something before you can get raped basically as a woman, right? But what I learned then throughout the years is that it doesn't matter what color somebody is. There's predators everywhere. There's assholes everywhere. So what white fragility means to me is that, a lot of people say, oh, we don't see color. We don't see color. Well, that's just ignorant. Of course you see color. You need to see the badness in people. You need to see the goodness in people. So it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what color somebody is. It's just that they're an asshole or a bad person or not, right? That there's evil inside of them. However, at the same token, yes, what the gentleman just said a bit ago about, if you're white, you automatically get privileges or a certain, path or course that many people don't get. That's totally true. However, I've never been able to get away with my whiteness, if I should be so bold to say that. Not like I'm tooting my horn or anything, but I've been arrested many, many times. And many times that should have never have happened, right? Should have never have happened. And my education, my socioeconomic level, my color, my skin never played into any of those things. So I'm not quite sure if I even have a question to pose, but I just find that really, really interesting because, like, I was raised very poor. You know, I didn't get a lot of opportunities, but I worked for them and I got them. And then still being a pretty white girl, I never, like, you know, got let off if I got caught speeding or whatever, right? So I have a hard time with that phrase, white fragility, because, like, I guess just personally to me, it doesn't connect with anything that I know to be true personally or with my circle of friends, you know?
So, Jill, I'll kind of go ahead and speak to that. So, just one thing I want to kind of reiterate the house rule is that, you know, we are, everybody's just speaking the truth, right? And so, so when you are called upon to speak your truth, we're not really talking back and forth to people about their truths. We're just kind of sharing our truths. Second,
gotcha.
No worries. The book really outlines this and does a really good job of explaining exactly what you just said. And so, you know, you spoke of you know, you've been arrested and you've never really gotten away with your whiteness. I think a question to ask yourself is how many times have you, been a victim of police brutality? How many times have you walked away with your life? And I think that's something very, very important when you're talking about white fragility, that the idea that your whiteness has not been any plus for you in life is in itself white fragility. It's a misunderstanding of the word. And she does a really great job of outlining this in the book. So just wanted to speak on that, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you.
No worries.
That's right.
So,
like, can I talk some more, or is somebody else going to talk now?
We're going to go ahead and pass the mic.
So, I kind of want to bring up the Coronado message board.
Whoa! All right.
So,
let's get into it. Yes. All I knew is I couldn't be the one.
But yeah, I mean, like, so before I lived in Coronado, I never lived in a neighborhood with a message board like Coronado has. And one of the things that really struck me when I first moved here was I would read people's posts, and there's always a post, like there are tons of posts, right, where somebody says, here's a recording of somebody on my front porch. What were they doing there? This makes me uncomfortable. And somebody from Coronado is bound to reply, maybe she needed some shade for a few minutes, right? Yep. And, you know, when I first saw that kind of response, and it was consistent, you know, Coronadans would get into arguments about it. My first response to that was, you know, this person feels threatened. Do you really need to, like, bring up things like maybe she just needed shade? You're just trying to, like, you know, rile things up. But after reading White Fragility, what I realized is, oh, those people are actually kind of doing the work that Robin DiAngelo is telling her readers to do, intervene in innocent things you say that are maybe not as innocent as you think they are. And so I guess that's the point I'm at. I'm at the point where I can recognize that, but I have not yet been that person to leave a quote unquote obnoxious comment on a Coronado message board wall. I'm not quite where I should be.
So, you know, that's very interesting because without knowing that from the book, that phrase, maybe she needed some shade. When I read that, I'm like, I need shade all the time because I'm like translucent. I'm so white, you can see my veins, right? So that was kind of like something that made me really think about just the sheer hypocrisy of how we regard one another. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm getting a lot of feedback, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so it's, and I'm kind of like, I get why it was said that in the book, and I get why that's a thing, but then, you know, not like I'm comparing myself at all in any way, but like, Seriously. Like, I'm fucking white as fuck, right? Like, I get burnt. I need shade all the time. So when I first read that, like, my split second was like, what's so bad about that? And then, like for a split second, right? Just for a split second, obviously, before my brain kicked in. And then I was like, oh, whoa, that's fucked up.
Gotcha. Yeah,
What
and I think Colin, you do bring up a really good point, and Jill, you spoke to a little bit too. Of throughout the book, she speaks to how to call this out, right? How to identify what is actually supporting racism. And so I think, Colin, your example is very, very spot on, right? Simple things like just saying, hey, maybe don't look at it from that way. Just look at it. She's just trying to cool off and get some shade, right? Like. So has anyone else experienced that either on the Coronado message board or just in real life of like how simple things that don't seem like racism to the untrained eye, if you will, but after reading the book, they're like, oh, that's definitely racism, and I'm going to combat that with X, Y, Z. Does anyone else have a story to share in that manner?
Well, even you don't know people's connotation on Facebook
Jill?
or on message boards. You don't know the connotation unless you're looking at them in the face,
Hey, Jill. So, so one of the other house rules is we're not going to, kind of bogart. We're going to allow other people to speak. So if you.
Okay, sorry. I'll mute myself. I apologize. Sorry.
No apologies. The rule is if you spoke on a question, go ahead and let like a couple of questions go by before we speak.
Okay. I find this conversation very awesome. So thank you. Bye. I'll be quiet.
So, Colin, if I may, I wasn't going to interject really at all in White Fragility. This is a white discussion, and I'm here for support. And I'm loving everything. I'm loving everything that's happening. But the Coronado message board, I'm going to speak on. And the only thing I'm going to say is that, I'm glad you came to that observation and that kind of conclusion, because it is very dangerous. These words and these phrases that are allowed, but they really, there's a hidden meaning in it. And she speaks a lot about this, in the whole redlining of districts and stuff like that, and how, and how a neighborhood is now urban, or the test scores when she brings it up, which is it's truly just it's powerful, and it's, the biggest thing the devil ever said was, the biggest lie the devil ever told was that he didn't exist, and so racism is very insidious and it's very subtle. It's very subtle, and it just lives on the message board. So I just want to say thank you for bringing up the message board. That's my 2 cents, and I'm telling you guys that that fighting those things has become a lot easier. So I want to give a shout out to everybody on the message board, because all I'm doing now is just agreeing with you guys. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Hey,
So
coming through somehow. Is that coming through someone specific, or why I hear all this garbled feedback?
I do too, actually. Can everybody place their phone on mute?
I just want to point out to whoever's not used Zoom before that since we're all on mute, if you're talking, we're laughing and we're nodding, and you just won't be able to hear us. So I know that's a little uncomfortable sometimes for people, but you got to mute so the feedback doesn't come through.
So this is Shannon. I wanted to kind of speak on the white fragility, and being that I work in corporate America. So I think the first, where I'm at on the spectrum is I'm able to identify it and to address it in a diplomatic way. And I feel like at this point, I'm finally educated enough where I have the education behind me now to address it so it doesn't become emotional. And I think that's a huge, that's like white fragility for me is when somebody breaks down emotionally because they're embarrassed or uncomfortable and they don't know how to communicate that. And I remember the first time I was a hiring manager and I was with a coworker and we were working together. This was many years ago, but we were going through applications and we had to call people, and we came across this one resume with a name that was not white. It was uncomfortable for this person to pick up the phone and just say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm calling for and I apologize if I say your name incorrectly, but I'm looking for this person. And they were so uncomfortable with making that phone call that I ended up doing it myself. And then we kind of had a whole conversation afterwards that was like, why did that make you uncomfortable? So I see this happens a lot, and it's really unfortunate. So it's that white privilege plays in that too. Somebody with the name Shannon, and we'll just use mine, not only is it, there's not any question on how to pronounce it, but I also have the backup as my name is androgynous, so it could be male or female. So if someone sees my name, I do get a, oh, you're a female, because they call thinking that I'm going to be a mister. So that white privilege plays into just my name. And it's being able to recognize those things that is why I feel like I may be further along in my, course of action of education for white fragility, but it's really not up for me to define where I'm at. It's up to the people that are not white to tell me where I'm at. And that's kind of where I'm at personally.
That's awesome. That's very insightful, right? Like into the work environment, and even down to the naming that you see on a resume, of just even, you have to see the person, but there could be white privilege even instilled into a name on a resume, and how it does or does not get a call from a certain team member at a corporate environment. Super interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Shannon.
This is Alicia. I think, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You're good. Go ahead, Alicia. Would love to hear from you.
I think the phases question is really interesting. I've been reading another book for teachers, white teachers teaching Black boys, and she does talk about the phases pretty explicitly. And it's also fun to see them tonight. And she talks about a phase where white people, start to learn all about racism, and they think they're super woke, and they start calling out other white people. And in the last few weeks, I did realize at some point that I might have been there, and might have, or at least looked like I was there. So I am hopefully moving through that phase where I recognize that all white people are racist in some way, shape, or form, and I'm still racist and still going to be working through these things continually. It's a process, and it's something that we're going to, as white people, we're going to have to continue to dismantle for the rest of our lives. Not something that we can just read a book and say, well, now I'm anti-racist.
That's super interesting. And even listening to you, I'm kind of thinking through my perspective too of, am I ready to go have this with somebody that's not somebody that's in this group, right? Everyone in this group through this conversation has made a decision to explore white fragility and to self-reflect on themselves. Am I ready as a person to go have this conversation with somebody that has zero concept of the idea, or really has no interest in trying to self-reflect on white fragility or white privilege, right? Is that a family member or a friend or a complete stranger? But reading the book, I almost felt like I was equipped to do that. But listening to the feedback, Alicia, is like, am I really, right? I've read one book. Like, should I take a little bit more time, read a couple other books, have a few more discussions like this? This is why I love this discussion, because it's also kind of saying, am I jumping the gun a little bit too big? Where am I in the phase, right? And to me, I'm still very much in the beginning phases of this entire process. One thing I did want to, we have a bunch of questions here, but one thing I did want to definitely discuss is what does the next steps look like for everybody? And I think through this conversation, we have definitely, back to the phases, we have people that have been researching and reading and having these conversations for quite some time. They've educated on it, they've held groups together. We have some people that are just entering the process here. But what do next steps look like for those at an entry level, or words of wisdom from those that have been engaging in this for quite some time? What would you recommend those steps look like? And what are the specific steps for you in your life?
I'll mention something. I started, I guess after reading this book, I really became curious about what are the real origins. Where does it all start? So I started reading Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, and I'm maybe about 10% into that book. But so for me, it's trying to sort of understand almost like a historical perspective on how this all started. I mean, if it's something that really has been around since that when the nation started, it just seems like it's more complex than just slavery. And I think that's kind of where I'm understanding with, reading this book. And I'm hoping that will, I still would like to get to a point where I could feel like I really do want to open up conversations with people who maybe wouldn't necessarily understand the idea of white fragility, but I'm still kind of struggling with sort of what I'm going to be doing personally next.
And I think that's okay to, not have the definitive next steps, right? It's a journey, and it doesn't have a playbook that comes along with it. So opening up to the group, any words of wisdom or self-reflection of what your next steps are can help others that don't know what the next steps are. What does that look like to everyone?
So I was in a very progressive school, super progressive school, with lots of newly arrived children during most of my teaching years. And we read Peggy McIntosh's piece, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of White Privilege, before it was, when it was still an academic paper, before it was published widely. And it's amazing how long ago that was, and still it's still very relevant. But like how we still oops, I'm not talking. Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh.
Well,
Can you hear me?
Now
we can hear you now.
Okay.
We can hear you the whole time.
But,
You're good.
So I'm not in the classroom anymore, which like after reading this book, it would be great to have read this book when I was still in the classroom. And now most of my interactions with people are in my business. And so Karen, the whole idea of Karen is floating around, and I'm wondering how to be an anti-racist and not also be Karen, because the other day, like I'm gonna give an example. The other day, a woman who's one of my vendors, she's African-American, young, and just such great energy. And she sent me a private message and said she was going to come in with her mom and shop. And they came in and they had a really good time, and we were talking and everything. And 3 young white guys blew through my shop, went to the t-shirts, decided what they wanted. And the kid came up to me, and I'm speaking with these 2 women, African-American women, and he just handed me his things and said, "I'm ready to check out." Completely disrespected the interaction I was having with these 2 women. And I like everything, everything was going on in my head at the same time, right? Did I just tell him to get the fuck out of my store? Or, I just like looked over at these 2 women, and they looked back at me, and I took his items and I set them down, and I said, "I'm not quite done with my customers here." But I mean, I feel like I passed up a teachable moment, because I feel like this young man has no idea. He's so far down the road from understanding what his privilege is. I mean, the example, the culminating example that the author gives is so specific, that I feel like I need some tools to be able to know how to be an anti-racist in a situation like that. Like what would have been a better thing to have done? I mean, I tried to shut him down, put his things down, finished my transaction and said goodbye to these ladies. And then I dealt with him, but I never told him anything like, do you know how rude you were, or anything like that.
I'd like to just add kind of like a, just an observation, because there's a lot of that going around. There's a lot of, is this a racist moment, And I think that we have to be careful with that, because as a Black person, not everything is racist. Not everything is racist. There are some things that are rude. There are some things that are just, okay, whatever. But I mean, in that moment, first of all, I'm glad that you were aware. You're aware of what's happening and that these people were being disrespected. And I think that I think it still could have been a teachable moment, and you did everything right. And everything you did was right, but I just think that he could be sexist towards women. It could be an age thing. It could be a race thing. It could be all those things. And so I think that there are moments when it's very clear what's happening, right? It's very clear. There was a most recent video of, I forget the big CEO guy at the tech company who was, being terrible to these Asians who were eating at the table next to him. And this was her moment. This was that waitress's moment, and she took it. And so I think you're going to know. I think it's going to be, not all the time it's going to be obvious to you. And that's where you're going to lean in when your Black friend says, or when your person of color says, hey man, that was racist. What just happened to me was absolutely racist, because they know, right? And so that's when you're going to believe them, right? It's no different than when a woman says, I was sexually assaulted. You got to believe them, And so, so I just, wanted to kind of, offer you some peace of mind in that, if that helps at all.
Yeah, I also think, someone brought up the Coronado message board, and I think absolutely you have to keep hitting the neighbors with the idea that you do not call the police. That's just got to be a rule. My sons are 23, and, they've had the police called on them by neighbors because, they didn't belong with a bike in the neighborhood or whatever. But, if anybody read the piece about I was a white racist cop, that piece, the police usually arrive after something serious has already happened. Nobody needs to call the police for something that's not, people aren't in immediate danger of their lives. I mean, the other day, that thread that got out of control about the kid who was rifling through someone's car. Yeah, the kid shouldn't have been doing it, but don't call the police. Don't call the police. It's just not okay. It is not okay. And our neighborhood has to get off that. Did you call it in? That is so wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. I might be the only person that feels that way, but.
It is. And speaking of that, there are ways for us or me, I've seen it being combated and participated in do you really have to say that the man walking down the street was a Black man or a brown? What's the relevancy of that, right? It's not, and to your point, why are you calling it in? And that calling it in has become a norm on the message board. And it's okay, we can address it one-off, but the larger systemic issue is that there's a hashtag, if you will, within a white neighborhood to keep out other races and ethnicities, right? And it's so publicly in our face on a message board that is documented. And to me, that's where the book really started of holy shit, this is scary, right? This is not only occasional mishaps that are coming across on Facebook feeds or, even at the grocery store once every 5 to 10 years. This is blatantly in our face to the point that group town meetings are being called and hashtags are being created around it. It's just, it was never identified to me as racism, but now it's coming to a part that's very aware and very scary. not only for being married to a black man, but being a white person. It's almost, you know, it's disappointing. It's very disappointing as a white person, you know, but I don't know how to, without attacking it one piece by piece, I don't know how to combat it systemically as a whole within Coronado, let alone a nation.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good conversation. Anyone else have thoughts or opinions, either, you know, next steps on the book, or next steps after reading the book, thoughts on the conversation around the message board, or just general thoughts on racism in the book in general that you would like to bring up as a discussion point?
So a couple of things, because especially early on, it's intimidating, right? To stand up and say, hey, you're being racist, and here's why, you know, and it can be scary because you don't know how that person's going to react. So in the beginning, I was quiet about my movements. I still do this. I buy books for my nieces because they're growing up in the same community I grew up. Now, it is a little more diverse, but it's not. The people themselves are diverse, but the mindsets are not. They're still the same. So I've started buying books for my nieces that have very women empowerment, showing women of all races and ethnicities. And I think that's an important thing too, is knowing the difference between race and ethnicity, because they're two very different things. But really kind of making sure that even though she's growing up in the same type of environment that I grew up in, that she's being exposed at an earlier age, and educating and providing those tools now. So there's a lot that we're not going to be able to fix, especially with the older generations. There's just, I mean, you can argue, you can be compassionate, you can be angry, you can be soft-spoken, you can have all the facts in the book, but you're not going to change their minds. And I've started to get to the point where I've learned to choose my battles. Like I want to talk to the people that are listening that will help advocate that change. Because if I'm only focusing all of my energy on one hateful person, I'm missing out on the opportunity of the 10 other people that are eager and waiting to listen. So that's where my mindset has changed. I started out with the little things, buying books, maybe posting something on my Facebook, you know, or sharing a meme, or reaching out to, you know, sitting at a different table at work and getting involved in conversations. But now I'm at the point where I'm on employee resource group boards. I'm actively participating in calls like this. I'm taking ally diversity and inclusion courses on my own so I can be more agile in my work environment and have that education behind me. So I don't only have a voice, but I have an educated voice that's no longer terrified, even though there's still situations where I'm scared to death. But I think that it's okay to take those baby steps, because as you start taking those baby steps along your journey, you find that each book that you read, each seminar you attend, each person that you talk to, you become bolder, louder and louder. And before you know it, it's just becoming part of your everyday life, and you start recognizing those things so much quicker. So I unfortunately have to drop off the call now, but thank you all so much for letting me speak, and it was nice being part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Shannon. One thing I do agree with what Shannon said, and I think if you, I do this in my personal or my work life as well, and I think it speaks to what Shannon was speaking to, that all of us should, I would challenge everyone to try to do this, is set a goal for yourself of what you're trying to accomplish, right? Obviously you read the book, but why did you read the book? Is it because you're trying to educate yourself? Is it because you're trying to fight racism? And if you kind of identify your goal, that dictates the tasks and activities or the engagements that you would have based off that goal. So for example, I have no interest in going and fighting those that are in KKK members and white nationalists, right? Like that's not my intent. That's a completely different ballgame. It's a completely different engagement that's very hostile, it's a lot of anger, and that's a fully different dedication than what my actual goal is to start off very small and get white people to acknowledge the fact that white privilege exists, right? If we can start there, and if I can get more people around me in my circle, then maybe we can start to get to other conversations around, okay, if we recognize white privilege, let's discuss racism. Let's discuss what it means to be a Trump supporter. That's not just politics, but this is a systemic issue around policies and procedures that go into place that tear down those people of color, right? So I would challenge everyone to definitively define what your actual goal is with this and kind of put it down on paper, and then your tasks and activities and your engagements will dictate how to reach that goal, which is what Shannon was saying. She picks and chooses her battles, right? Based off of the goal. Maybe she did define it, or maybe she did it subconsciously, but she has a goal whether she knows it or not. And that's dictating the types of conversations that she has. It provides a little bit more structure and guidance to what you're trying to achieve. That's my personal opinion. I would challenge everyone to kind of put that on paper and write it down and make it permanent, you know? Any others? I mean, we have a William on the line as well. I mean, we haven't heard from William. If you want to speak up, anyone else that wants to speak thoughts, an idea, a chapter, a question, kind of, you know, we wanted to go until, we set it for 8, but want to go until about 8:30. We have about 18 minutes left, so just opening it up to anyone that wants to discuss anything that they find of value on the topic.
Whether you read the book or not, there's a lot of people on just listening, and we invited that, but, you know, just based on the conversation and the discussion today, what's the takeaway from you?
I haven't read the book, but I just purchased it. I started with the not soft approach of starting to read How to Be an Anti-Racist. So it's a little more involved, and I'm just getting into it myself. And I think to speak to what you were saying, Taylor, it is a good next step to find out what's going on in the system that is creating racism. And when you think that you're not a racist and that you are, you know, above that and doing all the right things, and then you read this book and you find out all these ways that, unbeknownst to you, it's hidden in the system, because but it's hidden in plain sight and we're not looking for it. But being able to have that as a next step. But I think the reason I started down this path is probably because being able to talk about it, being able to have educated conversation about it without just immediately being angry, you know, and encountering other people that are just angry. If you have a lot more tools to talk about it, you can be softer with people because you're giving them facts and you're giving them realities and how to perceive things differently, and not just saying you're a bad person. You know, and that's one of the things in the How to Be an Anti-Racist book that they talk about, is that racism, you are either being racist or you're being anti-racist, and there's nothing in between. The being racist is, you know, even if you're ignoring what's going on, you're being racist. If you're being anti-racist, the only way to be anti-racist is to be actively fighting racism. So those are the only two things. So, you know, if you can kind of explain to people that this is the reality, so that we're all racist, it's not something against somebody you know, personally. It's not just you personally, it's the whole system. And that if we all could kind of take a step back from our white fragility and get on board with, okay, can we move forward now? Let's start reading some stuff that helps us to take these steps forward. That's what my interest is, because we can't just stay stuck in this swirling pool, you know?
Yeah, and definitely with the defensiveness, and even just the prejudice, having prejudice and having discriminatory prejudgments are a natural, that's a human trait, right? Like you can't, that's how we function as humans, and it's okay to have these. But to me, like, honestly, I never really discussed race until I was a grown adult, until my 30s, you know, like it wasn't really a part of school. My family didn't discuss it. We came from a very much that everyone's created equal, but that even has negative side effects to it, right? If you don't see race, then that means you can't see racism. And if you can't see racism, then we're never going to be able to address it, you know? So I think Jennifer, is this the first time that you started to, as you've started your journey here, is this the first time that you started to discuss race, or has it always been part of your life?
It's always been part of my life. My stepmother came into my life when I was 4, and she is Hispanic. Well, she's actually Mexican Serbian. So that part of my family has just, you know, when you're 4, that is just your family. You don't think of it really, you don't really notice that they haven't always been there as much when you're 4. So I had that going on, and then, you know, many of my cousins have married outside their race. So it's pretty diverse community in relation to other white folks, tends to be. But
yeah.
So I tended to, throughout school, I was always aware of race because of the fact of being white, and then having people that weren't white in my family. You recognized when people were being racist at school all the time, because they would speak openly to you because you're white.
Wow. So
people would speak openly racist things to me because I'm white, because they think we're on the same page. So I was very aware of racism very young. I went with my grandmother, my Nana. We went to a grocery store one time together, and we were in the checkout line, and the woman that was checking us out was white. And she lives over, I don't know how much you know of Phoenix, but she lives, Taylor, you're from here, so you probably know. She lives over on 43rd Avenue in McDowell area. So that's a pretty Hispanic community. So, but my Nana, being that she's also Serbian and Mexican, she's very fair. And so us standing in line with my Nana, who's very fair, and me, who's clearly white, we are going through the checkout line. My Nana has an incredibly thick accent, Hispanic accent, but she hadn't spoken yet. So the lady at the counter, I must have been probably 6. And the lady at the counter was like, "Oh, thank God, finally a white woman." And I was like, huh? You know, 6, you don't have a clue. And then my Nana opened her mouth and spoke, and the woman just froze because she realized she had made a mistake. So yeah. I have encountered racism from a very young age, but so, you know, it's been around, but at the same time, when you've been around it that long, like I was saying when I introduced myself, you think that you've seen all sides of it. You know, you feel like I've been in it, I've been with this family, and so you think you've seen all sides of it. But when I'm not with my family, I'm also part of white privilege, just being me. So, you know, I'm finding out all these things, and it's very hard to reconcile and not be able to talk about with some kind of eloquence, you know?
Yeah. And that was, I can't remember the definition in the book. I think it was right around chapter 4, 5, or 6 that it speaks to exactly what you're talking to, where, does anyone remember it was like white familiarity or white connectivity or something of that nature? Does anyone remember where it's basically saying when white people are alone with white people, they will discuss other races without knowing it, but it's comfortable to them. So it's kind of like what you're saying where, oh God, thank God a white woman, or, you know, asking about, I think the example they used was, what neighborhood do you live in? It's a very bad neighborhood. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other Black people that live here, right? And so you're just automatically connecting Black people with poor neighborhoods, right? I can't remember the definition.
It's coded wording too. You know, urban, you know, low test scores. Yeah. That was one that really stood out to me, was the low test scores, and how they talk about race so openly. But it's really it's a lot of hidden messages. It's no different than the Coronado message board when they say I had a young Hispanic boy take my stuff from me that I left outside. It's like, why do we need to know race? Like, why is race important for you to say right now?
I think that
why is it
chapter that
go ahead, Paul.
True for me was that one, because I mean, I just heard that all the time from people in my very, very self-consciously liberal social bubble when I was growing up. You know, I was always taught to respect everybody and make sure, guard against your own racism. I mean, I was taught that, but I was still taught these things about how, well, that's not a good neighborhood. We're not going to really talk about precisely why. But yeah, it was everywhere. And that was really clear. I think, you know, to kind of jump from that back to, you know, what are next steps? I mean, I guess one thing I was thinking about while I was reading that chapter was just like, little exercise I try to do with myself, especially now that I'm a teacher, is I say to myself, well, are you, if you object to a certain kind of behavior, are you objecting to it because it's intrinsically bad, or are you objecting to it because you have racist associations with it? Like, do you dislike that thing that black student's doing because it's bad to do, or do you dislike it because it's a thing black students do? And when I turn that around in my head, it's really scary when I have to say, I think I don't like that kind of behavior, let's say saggy pants, because I associate it with black people, not the other way around. And that just means it's racism. And so, you know, examining that kind of thinking, I mean, I think that's sort of my next steps, especially since I teach, you know.
Powerful and tough self-reflection.
One of the parts that was really bothered me because it's so true. One of them was about white people's feelings getting hurt and putting the attention on them, and even getting people of color to be on their side. Do you remember that part of the book?
Yep.
Yeah, that really bothers me. And I think that we need to be better at calling that out. That's one of the things. I mean, we have one of the people who rents a space here at the Hive is African American, and I remember somebody posted on the message board about like that white people have been really quiet since the killing. I'm forgetting George's last name.
George Floyd. And that was me.
Huh? Oh yeah.
That was me.
And so I read that article that you posted, and then I just immediately started posting on my personal page and all that kind of stuff. But I was for many of the reasons that were in that article, I didn't know what to do, and I reached out to Monty, and I said, you know, how are you doing? And he said, I witnessed first brutalization by a cop when I was 9 years old on my front yard. He grew up in LA. And my front yard was a kid I played with down the street. I don't think many things are going to change. So basically it's like, screw white people whose feelings are hurt because we're broaching a delicate subject for you. Because 9 years old and you watch a cop brutalize your friend from down the street. I mean, what on earth could that 9-year-old have been doing? And then, you know, it's just, so it's, you know, like enough, it's like enough. And I think people just have to say enough and have to, I've been called a racist before and was very disturbed by it, and like, no more. I need to reflect. I need to figure out, you know, it's not that the person calling me out and calling me a racist is having a bad day. Whatever I'm doing, I need to reflect on that and be better. And maybe read the anti-racist book.
Nice plug there.
I do think, you know, the authors ask this to the reader throughout the book. If this makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why. Why does that make you uncomfortable, right? And so when we see other white people that are start to be emotionally react to scenarios or conversations around to what you're speaking to, I think a very legit question is, kind of stop, but then change the conversation of, why is this conversation making you feel uncomfortable? Why does this bother you? Why, let's talk about that, right? And I think that, Calvin, you do that quite frequently, right? Just ask yourself, why does that topic upset you? Think about that, right? Why is the topic of deconstructing the police departments, why does that anger you? Why does that upset you? Or whatever the topic is at hand. So I'm not sure, Calvin, if you have a rationale or experience of kind of speaking to that as a tool set.
I just thank you for bringing that up, babe. I just think that triggered is the best word to come out of 2019. I think it came out of 2019, and honestly, it's such a great word because it's always the right word. It's always the right word. Now, how you feel about being called, being said that you're being triggered, that's something, again, you're going through it. You're being triggered. And I think that and for me, I had to understand that this word was trying to teach me something, that I'm upset right now. And it has nothing to do with what's happening in front of me. It has everything to do with my understanding of it, my reality of it. And that's where the control is. And so where triggered used to be an insult, I had to start asking myself, why am I triggered right now? Why am I upset right now? Why is this an issue right now? And so I made a post the other day that I had to take down because I realized I'm just being triggered. I'm being triggered, and I'm allowing, these unconscious things, or sometimes conscious things, to rule my decisions and stuff. So yeah, racism can absolutely be a trigger. Why are you mad that Black people are saying Black Lives Matter? It's because you might be racist, and that's a conversation we need to have, and not an idea that you need to be so that's not me. I have 8 Black friends. Okay. They also think you're racist. So it's very interesting times. It's very interesting times.
Love the conversation. I think the past 20 minutes have been my favorite part about the entire meeting so far. This is excellent. Is there anyone else that would like to bring up a different topic or add into the conversation that we've been having?
Taylor, I would. This is Sarah. Something that I have been working on is following Black women. And, I realized, I was asked in a meeting, in a Zoom call, how many Black women have I been led by? And I couldn't think of more than 2 people. And so what I'm practicing is being led by Black women, and reading books. And this is the reason why I haven't read White Fragility yet. It was recommended to read it. However, read 9 books by a Black woman or a Black man before I read, Robin DiAngelo, who is a white woman, her book. And so I'm working on that. I'm listening to podcasts by Black women. Anytime I see a live video that is being hosted by a Black woman, and they're typically talking about this topic of race and racism, I listen in to get used to that experience, because I notice, there's a call that I'm on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with all white women, and the call is titled "Do Black Lives Matter to White Women?" And I notice in myself that how comfortable I am in that space. And maybe part of it is because I feel like I can ask questions, and it is okay, from my white privilege standpoint, and with my white fragility, it's called out. It's not okay. It's called out immediately. However, in that space, I feel comfortable, and I'm noticing. And then when I attend the Black Lives Matter Metro Phoenix meeting, I feel different. It's the way that I am hearing the leaders speak is different than I'm used to, and I am someone that has been exploring. I went to Anytown. I don't know if anyone knows of Anytown, back in high school, and that's when these conversations first came up in my life. And so I guess I've never actually used this word, but I guess I've come to this moment in my life feeling very woke, and then being in those in those moments, noticing that discomfort with being led by Black women and Black men. Like, I'm noticing I still have a long way to go in being anti-racist and being anti-Black. And that's been very confronting.
How long have you been on that journey so far? When you say you're following Black women, is this a new development, or is it something you've been doing for weeks, months, years?
No, it's definitely new since the murder of George Floyd, and
Okay.
and since the calls, the insight trainers, Mary Stevens started that call specifically for white women. She is who brought that into my awareness.
That's very interesting. I love that aspect. It's gonna be interesting to see kind of when you also read, whether it's White Fragility or How to Be an Anti-Racist or whatever the case may be. You might have a different perspective than a white person that started off with those books and then went in reverse. So your experience is definitely going to be unique. I'd love to hear about it, even in 6 months or so, of that overall journey, whether it's similar to everyone on this call, or every one of us has a unique journey as long as we get to that end point, and how we get there, I think, is the most important piece. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see and hear from you again, Sarah. I love that component. It makes me want to go look at other books too that are led by Black women and Black men, but also continuing down the path of reading books made for white people about racism, right? So
I want to just mention, I think I misspoke. I said working on being anti-Black. I meant not anti-Black. Hopefully everyone understood that I misspoke there.
That was very subtle racism there.
All good.
I'm kidding.
Anyone else have a topic that they like to discuss, or building off of current conversation? I know we're right about that 8:30 hour. We're right over it. I do want to make sure that we have a sufficient conversation, but I also want to take up everyone's night as well. And I love this conversation. I think it is just even hearing from everyone, their backgrounds, the experience that they had with the book, their thoughts, their opinions have me think about certain things and where I want to go. Resources, additional books to explore after this one as well. Kelvin and I would definitely want to keep having these conversations in the future, whether that's bi-weekly, monthly, so on and so forth.
Hey guys, I'm just going to weigh in and kind of give my final thoughts, and say one thing. Tay, you did it. You hit the nail on the head. This was an absolutely amazing, powerful, impactful conversation. All around a book and us coming together on solutions. I think it's absolutely the most important thing right now is for everybody to acknowledge who they are and then to come together on solutions for that. One of the questions that everybody got to ask, and I kind of wanted to weigh in on why I read this book, not only because my husband is going through this, right, and understanding his whiteness, but also because I'm a loud person, and I don't want to fight online with white people anymore. I don't. You either get it or you don't. And I think that what this book does is that, and it's the first question I ask, if we're getting into a conversation about race, I just say, have you read White Fragility? I'm not going to argue with you about racism. I'm not going to argue with you about discrimination. I'm not going to argue with you about prejudice. I'm not going to argue with you about things that are absolute fact that you just don't want to believe because you're suffering from white fragility. And having read this book, it's just, the conversations just go like, have you read it? I'll be glad to have this conversation after you read it. And I end the conversation, and it's just, and I move on, because one of my biggest things is I don't argue with dinosaurs. This book has been a godsend. Not to, not because I want to throw it in people's faces, but to also throw it in people's faces. Like, you got to understand what you're going through, and I get it, and I can come from a place of compassion, but also just kind of disregard because you're not wanting to get it either. So, that's it. So Julia, you mentioned earlier today that, people just call it in. They call it in on the message board. Do you know why our show is called Call in America? It's because of the racism that happens in our neighborhood. And I was just like, man, everybody's trying to call it in. I'm going to create a show. I'm making a national show called Call in America. And what we're going to do is is call in and talk about solutions to today's most pressing issues. So that is where that comes from. That's a little tidbit from me. As the only Black man on this panel right now, I just want to say I absolutely feel seen. I feel heard, and I feel safe. And all of you guys have played a part in that today. And I'm telling you that that's not something that is that just happens naturally for Black people. And so I've cried over this stuff so many times. So you're not going to get any tears from me tonight, but I just want to tell you that. And all of you guys are my neighbors. I just can't tell you how welcome I feel and how safe I feel knowing that you guys are my neighbors. So I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my Black heart. You guys, well, my heart's red, but I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if you guys want to get the recording and hear about future events, put your email in the chat box, and we'll add you to the email that we're going to start circulating. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night and stay connected. Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. Thank you.